Hello, Miss Hill's Dream Team. I hope you are having a good afternoon. We are going to do lesson 12 in the Wind and the Willows, and this is our second to last lesson. Tomorrow will be our last day with Mole and Toad and Mr. Toad and Water Rat and our characters in the Wind and the Willows. All right, so what are we learning about? So themes are different little lessons and things throughout the whole book that you see over and over. Right? It's usually like one or two words, maybe the theme of it's family and how important family is. In our story, we have a few themes that we've been talking about. We've been talking about loyalty and friendship, responsibility, irresponsibility, and hospitality. So we'll look at our chart again together when we do our writing, which we probably already have done. So, what does the word conceited mean? Do you remember? Conceited means being full of yourself. You think you're the best and you're thinking only of yourself. You're not thinking of the golden rule. You're just thinking about what you want and not what happens to other people. So, would you describe Toad as conceited? Why or why not? I know I would describe Toad as being conceited. He has only thought about himself and hasn't thought about all the different characters he's lying to and stealing from. Right, so in the read aloud today, we're going to see if Toad is more conceited than usual. All right, so today you're going to meet some of our old friends, and then we're also going to meet some new characters from the Wild Wood. All right. There's pictures of it on here. So new characters from the Wild Wood. We're going to learn about weasels, ferrets, and stoats, which are sometimes called ermine. So these characters are going to be personified, just like rat, mole, badger, and toad, which if you remember, personification is when an animal or a thing acts like a person, right? A toad wouldn't actually steal a motor car. It's people that steal cars. Sometimes they shouldn't, right? But that's what happens. Okay? So listen carefully in the story to hear the different aspects of how those animals are personified. So think about the journey our animals have taken on our map, right? We started at Mole's house, and we went on the river, we went to Rat's house, and we went to Toad Hall. From Toad Hall, we went on the open road, and then back to Rat's house, and from Rat's house to the Wild Wood, to Badger's house. And they were going back to Rat's house, but then they smelled Mole's house and went over to Mole's house. Then we had Mr. Toad, and he probably went to the village, right, for when he went to jail. All right, and you can see some other characters in this map that we didn't know before, right? If you look over here, you can see we have the barge and the horse, right? And over here we have the caravan and the gypsy. And in our motor car, that's probably the people that Toad stole the motor car from on our map. Okay, and then remember where we left our story. So Toad was realizing that he wasn't the best thing ever, right? He fell into the river and was soaking wet when he was running from the police because he tried to steal the same motor car again from the same people. And they figured it out and they crashed, right? So now he's in the water and he's not too happy. And then he sees a pair of eyes and we see one of our friends again. So let's read on to find out what happens when Mr. Toad meets his friend. Will his friend help him? Some words that we have: imprisoned, put in jail. Indignant is an adjective, so it means angry of an unjust or unfair situation. Several people who had been waiting in line a long time to ride the roller coaster became indignant when a celebrity and his friends cut in front of the line. Then we have sentries. Sentries are guards, people who are guarding an entrance or stand watch. Then we have the word startled, all right, which is an adjective. It's something that describes something visibly scared or surprised, often jumping or moving suddenly as a reaction. Startled. Surveyed is a verb, is something you do. Took a general look at something, looked over. The geologist surveyed the land before she took a closer look at some of the rocks in the canyon. And then we have the word warily. Warily means cautiously, in a watchful way. So listen to those words, as we read the story today. The rat put out a neat little brown paw, gripped Toad firmly by the scruff of the neck, and gave a great hoist in a pull. The water-logged Toad came up slowly but surely over the edge of the hole. At last he stood safe and sound in the hall, streaked with mud and weed and with the water streaming off of him. "Oh, Ratty," he cried, "I've been through such times since I saw you last." "Toad," said the water rat firmly, "you go off upstairs at once and take off that old cotton rag that looks as if it once belonged to a washerwoman. Clean yourself up and put on some of my clothes. Now be off. I'll have something to say to you later." Toad was at first inclined to do some talking back. He had had enough of being ordered about. However, he caught sight of himself in the looking-glass with the bonnet perched over one eye, and he changed his mind. He went very quickly upstairs to the rat's dressing-room. There he had a thorough wash and changed his clothes. By the time he came down again, luncheon was on the table. While they ate, Toad told the rat about his adventures. When at last Toad had talked himself to a standstill, there was silence for a while, and then the rat said, "Now, Toady, on your own admission you have been handcuffed, in prison, starved, chased, terrified out of your life, insulted, jeered at, and flung into the water by a woman, too. Don't you see what a fool you've been making of yourself, and all because you stole a motor car?" Toad heaved a deep sigh and said very humbly, "Quite right, Ratty, I can quite see that, but now I'm going to be a good Toad. As for motor cars, I've not been so keen on them for quite a while." Probably for a few hours, right? "I have something else in mind, but all in good time. Let's have our coffee, and then I'll stroll down to Toad Hall." "Stroll down to Toad Hall?" cried the rat, greatly excited. "Do you mean to say you haven't heard?" "Heard what?" said Toad, turning rather pale. "Do you mean to tell me," shouted the rat, "that you've heard nothing about the stoats and weasels?" So here you have pictures of stoats and weasels. "What, the Wild Woodsers?" cried Toad, trembling in every limb. "What have they been doing?" "And how they've been and taken Toad Hall," continued the rat. Toad leaned his elbows on the table and a large tear welled up in each of his eyes. "Go on, Ratty," he mumbled presently. "Tell me all." When you got into that trouble of yours, said the rat. Toad merely nodded. Well, it was a great deal talked about, explained the rat. The river banks stuck up for you, but the wildwood animals said it served you right, and they went about saying you would never come back again. Toad nodded once more. The mole and the badger insisted that you would come back again somehow. Toad began to sit up in his chair again and to smirk a little. They were so sure that you would never be seen again, continued the rat, that they arranged to move their things into Toad Hall, and so one dark night a band of weasels crept silently up the driveway. Simultaneously, a body of desperate ferrets took possession of the kitchen garden, the backyard, and offices, while a company of skirmishing stoats occupied the conservatory and the billiard room. Okay, so here is a picture of a ferret. We've seen ferrets before. We know Olivia has a ferret. This one's not white like Olivia's ferret. And then we also see a billiard room is where there's a pool table like this. And a conservatory is an indoor garden room. So they've taken those over. The mole and the badger were sitting by the fire when those bloodthirsty villains broke down the door and rushed in upon them. They were unharmed and taken by surprise. Those two poor faithful creatures were turned out into the cold. The wildwooders have been living in Toad Hall ever since, concluded the rat. Oh, have they? Said Toad, getting up and seizing a stick. I'll see about that. It's no good, Toad, called the rat after him. You'd better come back and sit down. You'll only get into trouble. But the toad was off. He marched rapidly down the road, fuming and muttering to himself till he got near his front gate. At that moment there popped up from behind the palings a long yellow ferret with a gun. So palings are fences made of pointed stakes. Who comes there? Said the ferret sharply. Stuff and nonsense, said Toad very angrily. What do you mean by talking like that to me? Come out of that at once, or I'll... The ferret said never a word, but he brought his gun up to his shoulder. Toad prudently dropped flat to the road, and bang! A bullet whistled over his head. Who remembers what kind of word is bang? That's right, bang is an onomatopoeia. It's a word that makes a sound. The startled Toad scrambled to his feet and scampered off as hard as he could. He went back, very crestfallen, and told the water rat. What did I tell you? Said the rat. They've got sentries posted and they are all armed. You must just wait. Still, Toad was not inclined to give up all at once, so he got out the boat and set off rowing up the river to where the garden front of Toad Hall came down to the waterside. Arriving within sight of his old home, he surveyed the land cautiously. All seemed very peaceful and quiet. He could see the whole front of Toad Hall glowing in the evening sunshine. He would try the bathhouse first, he thought, very wearily. He paddled up to the mouth of the creek and was just passing under the bridge when crash! A great stone dropped from above, smashed through the bottom of the boat. The boat filled and sank, and Toad found himself struggling in deep water. It'll be your head next time, Toady, the stoats called out to him. The indignant Toad swam to shore while they laughed and laughed. Ha, 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 ha. The Toad retraced his weary way on foot and related his disappointing experience to the water rat once more. Well, what did I tell you? Said the rat very crossly. And now look here. See what you've gone and done. Lost my boat that I was so fond of. The Toad saw at once how foolishly he had acted. He admitted his errors and made a full apology to Rat. Ratty, I see that I have been a headstrong and a wilful Toad. Henceforth I will take no action without your advice and full approval. "If that is really so," said the good-natured rat, already appeased, "then my advice to you is to have some supper. In addition, do nothing until we have seen the mole and the badger and taken their advice." Yes, of course, the mole and the badger," said Toad. "What's become of them, the dear fellows?" "Well, may you ask?" said the rat reproachfully. "While you were riding about the country in expensive motor cars, those two poor devoted animals were trying every which way to get your property back for you. You don't deserve to have such loyal friends." "I'm an ungrateful beast, I know," sobbed Toad, shedding bitter tears. "Let me go out and find them. Out in the cold, dark night. Hold on a bit, Shirley. I heard the chink of dish on a tray. Supper's here at last. Hooray! Come on, Ratty." Well, he forgot about them fast. They had finished their meal when there came a heavy knock at the door. Toad was nervous, but the rat, nodding mysteriously at him, went straight up to the door and opened it, and in walked Mr. Badger. Mr. Badger looked decidedly bed-wrangled. He came solemnly up to Toad, shook him by the paw, and said, "Welcome home, Toad. Alas, this is a poor homecoming." Then he turned his back on him and helped himself to a large slice of pie. Okay. So, were you right about what was going to happen? What did you think would happen to Toad? So, what has Toad gone through since he last saw his friends? Right? He was arrested and put in prison, in a dungeon. He escaped. He got his way on a train, right? He jumped off a train and was in a wood. Then he met a barge woman and got thrown off a boat and stole a horse. And then he sold the horse to the gypsy. And then he stole a car, pretending to be a washerwoman again. And then he got chased by the police again and fell in a river and ended up with water rat. And now he has found that his house has been taken over. All right. Does he want to go on anymore? No, he is tired, right? Do you think that Toad will actually change his ways now that all this stuff has happened to him? I wonder. We only have one more story left, so I guess we will see. What happens to Toad Hall while Toad is gone? Who moved in? Right? Weasels, ferrets, and stoats move in. Why? Why did they move in? They think that Toad's never coming back, right? They think he's in the dungeon and never coming back. And they don't think he's going to come back because they don't support him. They think he's done some bad things. So every time Toad goes back to his home, what happens to him? What do the weasels, ferrets, and stoats do? What are some things that they do? Well, the first time Toad is startled when a ferret tries to shoot him. The second time he's in Rat's boat and the stoats throw a big stone into the boat and it sinks. In the read aloud today, you heard that Mole and Badger surveyed or looked over the outside of Toad's home. What do they discover? What's around Toad's home? Well, his home is surrounded by sentries or guards with guns. So what does that mean for Toad? It means it'll be very hard for him to get Toad Hall back. So from whose perspective is the read aloud told today? Well, who is it we're following around and hearing their thoughts and knowing their feelings? It's Toad, of course. It's still Toad. How would the read aloud be different if it were told from the perspective of the weasels, stoats, and ferrets? How would they tell their story differently? What do you think they would see? How would they be feeling about everything? How would they feel about Toad? At the end of the read aloud, Toad is very upset. He doesn't think he will be able to get his house back. Imagine you are with Toad, Rat, and Badger. What advice would you give Toad? How do you think he could get his house back? So what would you tell Toad if you were there with him? All right, our word for today is startled. In the story today, you heard that Toad was startled by the ferret with a gun. Say the word startled. When someone is startled, they are suddenly scared or surprised and often move or jump as a reaction. Rachel was so startled when her sister popped out from behind the door that she jumped. Have you ever been startled? Okay, good job, third graders. That is our story for today. Stay tuned for tomorrow when we have our last Wind in the Willows story.